We are not here to waste time, sir. We are here to get down to business.
To defeat the Huns.
What are we talking about here? Do you believe that people fall out of love?
I feel like you got a hot take on this one.
This is one of the rare conflicts that have been recorded.
How do I know if my standards are too high?
Is it ever appropriate to fight in front of your kids?
I do think so. All right, let's dive right into it. We've got
Okay.
this new format. We are not here to waste time, sir.
Yeah.
We are here to get down to business. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Do you, quick question, after I just said get down to business, now I'm going to rabbit trail us. When you hear that, when you hear someone say, let's get down to business, do you feel compelled to complete that sentence with, and defeat the Huns? Or did you not grow up with Mulan?
Let's get down to
There you
business.
go. See?
To defeat the Huns.
See? Okay. All right. Well, we know what we're watching for movie night this week.
I'm unfamiliar.
We're going to have to catch you up.
What is it?
Fun fact, that was Donny Osmond
Okay.
as that character.
What are we talking about
The
here?
movie Mulan.
Oh, no, I've not seen it.
Anyways, Brandon gets it.
I've not seen it.
You're too old, boomer.
I guess. Boomer. Wow. All right.
Okay, not quite
No,
that bad.
no shade on boomers.
All right, so first question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to these.
Shall we share the format? And do we need to? Oh, we're just getting right into it.
You do
We're not
it.
talking about Thanksgiving or anything.
No.
Okay.
Everybody assumes that
Thanksgiving was
happened,
great.
and it
Okay.
was great.
All
And
right,
we all
sounds good.
ate the, typical things.
I feel like this question might have been reality for some people's Thanksgiving.
That's very, very true. Very
Is it
true.
ever appropriate to fight in front of your kids?
Okay, before you answer that, real quick, give people a rundown of the new format. We said we have one if they're not familiar.
So in the past, we just kind of talked about whatever, right? And so this is, we are taking in requests, right? So if people, whether through Instagram or email or whatever, will ask, bring up questions, things they'd like.
And you
to-
guys are asking good questions,
Yeah.
by the way.
Exactly. Things that they'd like to hear us maybe have a take on. And so what we're doing is having 3 questions, right? And then we have like a running timer, I want to say, like 10 minutes. How am I going to know? Are you going to like
I'll just wave at
you
you.
wave? Okay.
All
All right. So yeah, so it's but we can do overtime, right? Like if we're rolling,
Sure.
okay, like we
If
don't
it
want to,
requires overtime, just like a
then
game,
fine.
you
Yeah,
go there.
Exactly.
Do you want me to give you a sound effect like a
Ooh. I feel like Glinda.
This is next level stuff going on here. Yeah, sure, that'd be great.
Okay, let's do it.
All right.
So first one, is it ever appropriate to fight in front of your kids? All right. I feel like you got a hot take on
No,
this
go
one.
ahead. I like to fight in front of your kids. You want to go first or second?
No, I can go with it. That's fine. No, I do think so. Now, I think it also depends on what your definition of fight is. I don't think it's ever appropriate to scream, name call, hit, any of that kind of stuff. Shouldn't be doing that ever. Like, it's not good in front of your kids or behind closed doors to be doing that to one another. But I think that it is really important for your kids to see healthy conflict resolution. So it's okay even if it's a little tense sometimes, but when you're not crossing that line into inappropriate behavior, when you are addressing each other with respect, you're each sharing your viewpoints, even if it is somewhat passionately, and you're hearing the other person out, you're, saying back to them, okay, I feel like I'm hearing you say this. Is that what you mean? When you're modeling healthy conflict resolution, you're teaching your kids how to do that. I think that's the really unfortunate thing for a lot of people is our parents, I know a lot of people said, oh, my parents never fought in front of us. Like I never saw my parents fight. And the attempt there was to protect you from any type of trauma around it. But what it left you with as an adult was not really sure what healthy conflict is supposed to look like, not really sure how to have it yourself, and also feeling compelled to do the same thing where we're waiting and tucking this away behind closed doors, and then maybe it's not going so well, right? So, that's my hot take is I don't think you need to purposefully have every fight in front of your kids. subject material isn't even appropriate for them, but it's okay for them to see some healthy conflict.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I think in a sense, it's important, I think, to normalize conflict or disagreement.
Sure.
Like we're going to have that, right? And so I think
Absolutely.
if you go, I never saw my parents argue, you use the term fight, that kind of sounds like
It sounds
a
vicious.
knockdown,
Sure.
drag out type situation. But I think if you're not careful, what you can do is have a false positive with artificial harmony. So we all pretend like we're all good, but we're really not. So we're either, just burying our actual thoughts and feelings and never bringing them up, or we do it behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes that's appropriate to handle it that way. But I think in general, being able to model, like you said, healthy conflict in front of the kids. I think the reality, though, too, is, in my experience, whenever you're having a conflict one-on-one with somebody and you add a third party in the room, it definitely creates a different dynamic. So like if you and I were just having a disagreement and just even, having Brandon in here, right? Like now it's like, okay, I might have a harder time admitting I'm wrong because I look like I just, I might feel embarrassed in front of this third party, right? So I think you have to be kind of conscious of that. Like, okay, we might have a higher chance of our egos getting in the way a little bit, or, not wanting to maybe let something go that I normally would if it was just the two of us, because I'm maybe a little embarrassed in front of my kid. Because maybe, when you're having this conflict, maybe pretty quickly you realize like you're wrong. But you don't, do I want to admit that in front of my kid? You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think
But
like
it is actually one of the, again, counterintuitive, one of the best things you can do is
100%.
let your kids see you admit that you were wrong.
Right.
I think some people, excuse me, are worried that somehow it's going to undermine them as a parent or something. No, your kids know you're human. They know you're wrong sometimes. So for you to be able to go, stop yourself mid-argument and go, no, that's a good point. No, I'm wrong. You're right. You're right. I'm sorry about that. That you are teaching them how to do the same thing. You're modeling
I
that
agree.
behavior.
I agree. I just think it's hard to do. It's hard to do when there's a third party in there, right?
It is harder.
And so but also sometimes a third party can hold you a little more accountable to things you might have, you
Popped off and said in a private space.
Yeah, you and I, a few weeks ago, we were disagreeing on something related to one of the building projects, and there was a third person in the room. And so we were kind of going back and forth, and there was a lot of tension and stress.
Yeah.
And if the third person hadn't been in there, we probably would have been a little more blunt. And yet that third person did kind of like force us to like kind of be on our best
Have
behavior.
a little more diplomacy.
A little more diplomacy, more respect for each other, right? So I think like, to be careful about what you say. I think sometimes it's just the two of you, you just let it fly. And it's like, yeah, that's hurtful, So I think like, I don't know. I think if you handle it the wrong way, it could be traumatizing to your kids and teach them wrong behaviors. But if you do it right, I think it's absolutely formative.
Yeah.
And because the reality is whether they get married or not, and they likely will, but even if they don't, they're going to have significant relationships. They're going to have conflict. They're going to have differences of opinion, disagreements. And
Work situations.
I'll be honest.
So many.
I've seen in the workplace over the years, like most people don't know how to have healthy conflict. I see it all the time. People who like, they either don't have it at all, or when they do, it's like full tilt. And it's like, how do you work through this in a way? And people pick up all kinds of like dysfunctional, like they're overly sarcastic or they're passive aggressive or they're whatever it is, and it's like, that not only affects your home, which is what's most important, but everything.
It does.
The way you work
Relate
with other
to
people,
everyone.
right? And then I've seen people, because they're so uncomfortable, maybe their family, conflict was such a negative word. Like even when I say that, conflict, okay.
That you feel tension.
It sounds like
some people get a knot in their stomach from that.
100%. And that's why I said earlier to like, I think it's important to kind of normalize it because it's part of life.
Right.
If you handle it right, you bond through it.
That's right.
You solve problems quickly. You can even earn each other's trust and respect, all of that. But I've seen people who they had such negative feelings around conflict itself that in the workplace, they end up making mountains out of molehills. They end up burning bridges with people. They bounce job to job. They can't stick anywhere because once you're in there long enough, eventually we're going to rub each other the wrong way. Eventually we're going to do important work that we all feel strongly about our opinions. How do we work our way through that? So if you don't know how to do that, that's not normal to you.
Yeah.
You might end up kind of not being able to put your roots down anywhere, not being able to, last anywhere because when it gets down to it, you either, mess it up with intense conflict or you just run from it.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is something else I think I've noticed a lot of times with people who grow up in houses where you never saw your parents fight is I think some people grew up with the assumption that like their parents didn't really ever fight because they just saw them, getting along in front of them. And so then it kind of it causes them to have, even if it's subconscious, this unhealthy expectation that they won't have conflict. Like a good relationship doesn't have conflict. And so then they get into a long-term relationship, a marriage, whatever. And when they start hitting some bumps and you guys are disagreeing on things, I watch people freak out.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, this is clearly like not good and this relationship is not working. Well, no, you guys maybe don't see eye to eye on a few things and you're working it out. But just because you're not agreeing on absolutely everything and you are having conflict doesn't mean that you guys are like absolutely wrong for each other and should never speak again.
Yeah.
Your parents had those conflicts behind closed doors, or quite frankly, maybe they didn't ever have the conflict outright and they just had a really distant
And
relationship.
it affected their intimacy,
That's
their
right.
their relational intimacy, right? So here's another thought too, like to add to this conversation. So I'll think from a dad's perspective. So I'm a man, I'm a dad, and there's a part of you as a dad, a little bit selfishly, but it's not like evil, but like you want to be your kid's hero, right? So you want your kids to go, oh, my dad, he's a force of nature. He's powerful, he's just this Superman of a guy, right? And when your kids are little and they think you're, you can leap tall
You're
buildings.
10 feet tall.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's kind of a good feeling, right? So there's a part of you that, wants to be that guy all their life who like, man, there's nothing he can't take on and there's no problem he can't fix. And my dad's the smartest guy in the world, whatever. And so if you're not careful to maintain that, it can be selfish and actually put your kids at a disservice because at some point they have to see like, no, dad is a human and he struggles. Dad is a human and he's overwhelmed right now. Right. And if you're so intent on protecting that image to your kids that they have to think that, that I'm rich and powerful and strong and smart and I'm Superman, then instead of letting them into your humanity and even see see your weakness, it equips them to deal with their own. So I'll wrap this last thought up. So you take that conversation or they take that concept as a dad and take it into a marriage. If you're going, hey, we want our kids to think we have the perfect marriage. We want our kids to think that, this about us, then you end up ultimately robbing them of the humanity of your marriage and the fact that things don't always go well. We don't always see eye to eye. And sometimes we really frustrate each other and we get angry with each other. And here's how we work our way through it. So I think, don't do it haphazardly, but do it intentionally. Sure. Step back and go, how could we, use some of these conflicts as an opportunity to walk our kids through it. And I'll say this last thing. If you mess it up, so you do cross the line, you do something you shouldn't do. You call somebody a name or you talk down to them or whatever. Go back and apologize to your kid. Hey, you know what? I said, apologize to your spouse, obviously, but then go back and say, you know what? I was talking to mom the other day. I said some stuff. That was totally out of line. After I had a chance to reflect on it, I was embarrassed of what I said. And I went and talked to mom and I made that right with mom and she graciously forgave me. But I said that in front of you and I should have never said that and you shouldn't either. And I'm going to do my best to do better. Yeah. So if you mess it up a little bit, go back. And again, that's a profound lesson.
Huge.
To them as well.
Yep. Great one. All right. Ooh, next one. Read it out, Ford.
Do you believe that people fall out of love? You want to go first or second?
I went first last time.
Is that a no?
No, I'll go first again. That's fine.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I think that a lot of it has to do with your definition of love. I think that, sometimes people feel like they are, they think that they're in love with someone when maybe it's more of an infatuation. And so something like that wears off. I just want to kick it straight to you because I know you have a few thoughts on this question that we've talked about before, and I don't want to waste time. Let's just kick it right over to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's I was actually thinking about a few weeks ago, you and I were out of town, and Brent Allen preached at the church, and we're in a series where it's called "There's More to the Story." So we're looking at texts that, like, on the surface, are like, "What in the world is that?" And then you go, "There's more to the story," right? So the one, Jesus is saying, "Hey, unless you hate your mother and brother and father and husband and wife and children, you essentially have no part with me, or you're not worthy to be my disciple," right? Which is like a jarring thing to read. Like, well, what in the world is Jesus saying there, right? Certainly, Jesus isn't saying you should hate your family. It's hyperbolic, and essentially, he's talking about the difference between,
He's emphasizing the space between the two.
yeah, like that you shouldn't have any idols or anything like that, right? And that your love for me should be so much greater than for anybody, even your family, right? So then we start talking about that even more deeply. Brent and I were discussing it when he was sharing with me what he was going to preach. And as I was thinking about the text, I was thinking, like, usually when we hear love, we immediately attribute affection to love, right? So you think of love and affection as one and the same. So, it seems like what Jesus is saying there is, unless you have way more affection for God than you have for your spouse or your kids or whoever, then you can have no part with me. But I don't think that the text really has anything to do with affection. I don't think that's what's being said there. Because obviously, God is a spirit, you are tangible. I look in your eyes, we make contact with each other. We give each other gifts. We give each other words of affirmation. Like, there's all of those exchanges, right? And affection comes through reciprocity. So when you reciprocate love and you exchange it, then affection builds. But you can have love without high levels of affection. And I was actually thinking about our kids, right? Like, I love our kids equally, but I don't have equal amounts of affection for them. My relationship with Ella, there's a lot of reciprocity. We have conversation, we affirm each other, there's all of that, right? She gives me hugs, we spend quality time together. Hudson, with his autism, he doesn't reciprocate. In fact, most of the time, just shooting totally straight, like most of the time, Hudson makes life more difficult. And I embrace it, and you embrace it gladly. Like, and we do it. And part of our love, like really our love for him, is built on our showing up for him, giving the best we can, consistently, faithfully, day in and day out, to show up as the best mother and the best father we can, even when there's
not all the warm fuzzies,
or sometimes no reciprocity, right? We deal with sometimes primarily and sometimes exclusively negative emotions in relationship. He does sometimes make life very frustrating and difficult. And yet, even though the feelings aren't always affectionate, the consistency and the faithfulness really is where the love is. And so, back to that text, I don't think Jesus is trying to get us to dampen our love for our family members or our affection for our family members, or even go, wow, I feel guilty because I should have more affection toward God. But I think what he's talking about is ultimately faithfulness and obedience and all that kind of stuff. So to this question, do people fall out of love? I think it's probably linking those two. It's going, hey, I feel less affection than I ever have toward this person, and maybe it's coming from a lack of reciprocity. I'm doing all the giving. I'm not really
Right.
getting anything back. It's been that way for a while. Therefore, my love tanks have run dry, so to speak. And sometimes even, again, people start hurting one another. And so, they're starting to count the costs like, hey, we're trying to make this work. It's not working. And so I think, again, the question comes down to in the relationship, if I'm trying to make sense of how I'm feeling about this, how would we jumpstart affection would be, we have to decide, are we willing to live in a loving reciprocal relationship
Right.
and to rebuild affection? And again, how do you do that? Well, through the love languages, right?
Yeah.
What am I saying to this person? Words of affirmation, quality time. Have we spent quality time together? Are we appropriately touching one another? Are we physically affectionate? Are we serving one another and all of those things, right? But I think, again, what sometimes love means being faithful even when affection is low. And I think what happens a lot of times in, again, romantic relationships, 'cause that's my assumption on this question, is probably coming from, somebody who's been romantically intertwined with someone, in love with them, and they're like, I don't feel what I used to feel. And I think at some point in relationships, people have to decide, are we going to do this the way that it's meant to be, which is reciprocate, and which takes two willing people to do that. So I think that's the crossroads. Like, that's probably dwindled because there's a lack of reciprocity. So affection has gone by the wayside, and then that loss of affection we would call falling out of love. That's what people would call it. And I think, again, it's a simple formula to get it back. The question is, are two willing parties willing to go there and pay that price and do that?
I think it is also important to differentiate that for someone like Hudson, there's a lot of it that is just, it's an incapability.
Oh,
for him,
absolutely.
right? Like, it's an actual physical, mental,
Right.
issue that is causing him to be able to reciprocate.
Yeah.
Typically in a marriage, that's not the case.
Yeah.
It's the other person has chosen to stop showing affection. And often that is a symbolic thing of, they're not investing love into the relationship. And so that's where I think what you said about it being two people, like, even if you decide that you're like, I'm gritting my teeth and I'm getting into this, you can't hold a marriage together by yourself.
Yeah.
You can't hold a relationship together by yourself. It does have to be two people. And that's where you have to come to the table and talk about, like, is this something we can fight for? Or is this just, I don't want to let it go, and the other person has decided, like, I'm checking out. And the loss of affection is really symbolic of the fact their heart's not there. So
Yeah. I mean, my love for our kids and your love for our kids has nothing to do with reciprocity. If they never reciprocated one time, we would love them just the same. But affection is affected by reciprocity.
Sure.
Right. So we go, in that scenario, in that context, I'm going to love you. And one of the things I had to come to peace with Hudson was, I always felt like I wasn't a good dad in my heart, even though my head knew I'm doing the best I can, because I felt like if I loved him better, I would have more affection. I felt like, look, man, this kid didn't ask for this autism thing. He didn't ask for this, and I felt like if I loved him like he deserved to be loved, I would feel higher volumes of affection. And it took a while for me to realize, no, affection comes from reciprocity, and based on his context, he doesn't give that back. And actually, in some ways, it's the greatest act of love maybe I've ever done in my life, to be so faithful and so consistent with someone that gives me nothing back, right? And again, it's my son, and he can't help himself. Like, he didn't ask for this. And most of the time in marriages, or romantic relationships, it's people who, for whatever reason, have decided they're not willing to try to reciprocate anymore. And that's where it's heartbreaking.
Right.
It comes to this place where you have to decide, like, are two people, like, we can stir this affection back up, but it's going to take us, serving one another, loving one another, and showing it back and forth.
Yeah. I think that is one of the key differences between a, peer-to-peer relationship, like a romantic relationship, versus a parenting one. And I hope that, that being vulnerable like you just were is helpful to a lot of parents, because I think a lot of times for various reasons, you know, whether your kid's going through a hard time, they're going through a stage, you know, where they just want nothing to do with you, or they went through, you know, whatever it is, like they're making life hard, right? And honestly, let's keep it real. I mean, there are probably moms out there of babies, toddlers, right? And you're like, some days I just want to scream and run out the front door. And I hear women talk about that, and they feel so terrible because they're like, I thought I was supposed to just feel warm and fuzzy all the time, you know, like, and it's not their fault that they're crying and pooping their pants and whatever, like they're doing what they should age appropriately do. It's okay that you don't always feel all the affection. That doesn't mean you don't love your kid. The way you choose to keep showing up for them, even when it's hard, is the definition of love.
Let me throw one more thought. I know we're in overtime, but I'll throw one more thought on it. Is I would say let's go back to like a marriage or a romantic relationship. There are times where, based on somebody's season of life, they're not able to reciprocate. Maybe they're going through like, you know, a horrible mental health type situation, or they're going through a tragedy.
That's a great
or
call out.
They're going through like a really, really hard time. Like they're low, and like they're maybe taking more than they give, or maybe they're in a season of like where they really aren't giving anything at all. And I think there's a difference like between that and just someone who's quit on the relationship. But sometimes that season of time is like, I know this person doesn't have much to give me at all. This really isn't as reciprocal as I prefer, but it's a season. And for the season, the way I'm going to demonstrate love is by, you know, continuing to be faithful and you know, serving them. And
that is the definition.
That's
really good.
Even though maybe you don't feel all that much affection, even though you maybe feel sorry for them, or you realize, you know, you're hurt hurting for them, like, but you're like, you know, I'm actually running dry on affection, but I'm going to stay the course because I know this is a season.
That's good.
All right, let's keep it rolling. Why don't you read this one?
All right. I love how you said that like I didn't read the other two.
Huh? I did. I thought I read the other two.
Greg did read the other two.
I read the other two. Right?
Is this having conflict with a third party in the room?
All right.
Let the tape show.
Didn't I read the first one and then?
No, I read the first one. I don't know if I read the second one, but I know I read the first one.
I feel like an awkward third party in the middle of this disagreement right now.
But you are the third party that can actually help.
This is one of the rare conflicts that have been recorded. Because for the most part, you have a conflict, and I'm like, no, you said that, and she's like, no, I didn't, and I'm like, you totally did. Yeah. I've even made the joke. We need to start recording these conflicts
because you would always be right if they were recorded. I'm sure.
You said it.
Maybe I just answered first on the other two, and that's why it felt that way. I am in my late 30s and long for a marriage and a family.
By the way, you're not in your late 30s.
Oh, no, I'm older than that. I don't want to settle for a spouse that isn't right for me, but how do I know if my standards are too high? Take it away, Greg.
Well, let me digest this question here. So, late 30s. So this is somebody who feels like, I'm assuming based on this question, that they thought or planned that they would be married by now. That they would starting to get to an age. We don't know if this is a male or female, right? No,
we don't. But I mean, either way, you know, I think you feel like your clock is ticking to some degree, right? Like time is still passing you by, even if your biological clock isn't ticking.
Right. Okay. So
they have high standards. They want to make sure that they have.
Yeah, I guess my question would be around what do they mean by standards, right? So if I'm going like, should I lower my standards? I would say, well, write down your standards. What are they, right? So if you're like, hey, I'm so specific. This person has to be 6'4", 220 pounds with 7% body fat, and you know this color hair and that job and that income level and blah blah blah, right? You might need to chill out a little bit. but I think like if you're going like what are the standards that are your non-negotiables? Like what are the things that you go, this is really important to me in my life partner. This is important to me in the person I'm going to marry. I'm going to I'm going to totally hitch my wagons to. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're, somebody that frankly, if we don't have kids, like we don't have a family, maybe that is your desire and you want to have a house full of kids and whatever, but somebody that like, even if we don't, like this is my person and all of that. And so, I mean, I think sometimes people, I've heard over the years in church, people go, yeah, I made this list of 17 things that I wanted and God brought me, Prince Charming or whatever. And yeah, I mean, sure, that's great. And sometimes it happens, but I think sometimes people are maybe majoring on the minor things, going like, I won't lower my standard. And again, I'm not here to tell someone, to which ones of their standards they need to let go of or whatever. But I guess my 2 cents on it would be, I would zero in on character. I would zero in on the type of person that that you want to be connected to and that you want to do life with and that you want supporting you and you're supporting them, and kind of focusing on that.
Yeah. I would say, to call out something that you mentioned in the first sentence, I think there's a big difference between, like, say, moral standards and preferences. And for you to be able to separate out those two categories.
That's good.
All the things that you mentioned in your first descriptor sentence are all things that can be taken away. Aside from height, I mean, I guess unless you lose your legs or something. But we're all going to shrink a little with age, right? But it's like our bodies will change. Your hair will go gray. You could lose your job, right? Like all of those are things that will probably change about a person to some degree over time. So there's nothing wrong with like having certain things that you're attracted to and whatever, but like getting to the point where someone has to stay exactly this way and not be a dynamic character for you to be attracted to them or for you to want to be in a relationship with them. I think that's a little bit of a red flag to like maybe ask yourself some good questions. Again, nothing wrong with having preferences, but just questioning them, right? And why they matter to you. Some people talk about like, I'm not going to date make somebody that makes less than a certain amount of money. Well, again, that can be gone in like that, in an instant. So it's okay that you have a preference for a certain standard of living. But if that's your main reason behind being with somebody, I think there's some questions you need to ask yourself about why that matters. What is that creating a sense of false security for you? Because it's not real security. It can all be gone. Stock market could crash. They could lose their job. They could be in a car accident. Anything could happen, right? And so I think separating out standards from preferences. A standard is something that you're like, man, no matter what, like if the world crumbles around us, we both agree on this. These things matter. Preferences are maybe around the way that somebody keeps house. Preferences like, and maybe you're, ultimate OCD and you're like, I can't stand having a fork in the sink. Maybe you need to lighten up a little because that's not necessarily a moral standard, right? Like it's okay that you don't want somebody that leaves a wet towel on the bed, right? Like that's gross, or is just a total slob, but you might need to meet in the middle a little bit because you're putting your preferences for life operating a certain way over your desire to like meet someone in a true communal relational space.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting how many things I think that we think of as very important before we get married and then how much you realize they aren't important after. You hear people talk about like we have all the same taste in music and we like, and it's like, you know what, like on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't really matter. If you don't like the same music, put headphones in, like, but is this somebody I can laugh with? Is this somebody I have deep conversation with? Is this somebody that will be flexible with me, that wants to journey through life with me? Those are the things I think you need to separate out.
I think one thing I would encourage this person is in many ways, you're in a fortunate position to really be making this choice in your 30s because, some people, they marry young and there's some advantages to that in terms of having some years of youth together and all that kind of thing. But I think there are probably a lot of people that make choices in their 20s that, through the wisdom of a 20-year-old versus the wisdom of someone in their 30s. Sure. And so I would encourage this person to really sit down and whether it's with a confidant or a counselor or somebody, and really like catalog your experiences, really like work to go, what have I learned? Like what wisdom have I gleaned that put me in a unique position right now to make a really great choice or to see life through a 30-something-year-old lens versus a 20-something-year-old lens, instead of like getting caught up in, wallowing in the regret of, oh, I wish this happened in my 20s, like, and, oh, I've lost time and I'll never get it back. Go, well, hey, you know what? I am where I am right now, and this is a really unique position for me to really glean this wisdom, and to make sure also, like, that you're looking at what those preferences or standards, like, where's that coming from? Why do I feel so compelled to have somebody that's at this income level or this that looks like this or whatever? Is it something to do with how I feel about myself? Is there something there that, like, if I could wrestle to the ground, I might feel less compelled to need this in a person that maybe in my head I know isn't that big a deal. It's not like, shouldn't be a huge priority, but for whatever reason I feel like I need it, like I have to find this or whatever. And so I think, again, somebody in their mid to late 30s is in a really good position to do that. Like you're old enough to not be young, but you're still, young enough. You got a ton of life ahead of you. So I would encourage them, like, do that hard work, like dig into where are these desires and these quote standards coming from. I mean, I think you want to find somebody who, is a person of integrity, is somebody who, the things you really value in life, they value as well. And, again, some of the things that really matter in terms of, how they show up in doing life together. But instead of kind of, starting to feel like everything's slipping away, go, you know what, this is actually, this has some real advantages.
Yeah, I agree. And also kind of taking it all the way back to your first question, like with healthy conflict and that kind of stuff. I think that's another really important piece of this is maybe you do see, maybe you don't, maybe you don't see eye to eye with somebody on every single issue, social issue, whatever, right? Can you still have a really healthy marriage when some of those things are not the same? Now, I think you need to separate out what is an absolute, like, no give moral issue for you and what is maybe it bothers me that we don't see the same, see things the same way, but like at the end of the day, it's okay. You and I don't see everything eye to eye. We've had differences of opinion on different subjects, and we've had spirited discussions around it. But at the end of the day, we listen to each other's thought processes on it. It's actually been really enlightening for both of us at different times to step into someone else's shoes and consider it different. And we may adjust our views slightly, but still not totally come to the same conclusion. That's okay. It doesn't change my love for you. It doesn't change your love for me. And it doesn't change like the core moral issues that we are aligned on this, or just core life choices that we think this is highly important.
That would be a great example of a personality trait or a character quality that's important that may not show up, like at first glance. So like the idea of like somebody who is okay being disagreed with, or that is even open to the other side of the argument.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
that's a huge
there's
deal.
a lot of people who, you say something that they don't agree with and you're just shut down.
Yes.
And they don't even listen.
They're not curious.
Like a terrible listener. Like they're just, now it's just like, I'm talking to a wall. So either we can't talk about these things that we disagree about, or if I do, it's just incredibly frustrating because you're not even trying to understand a point of view other than your own. So that would be a great example of something that probably in your 30s, you're going to value a lot more than your 20s. In your 20s, you're like, sometimes it's somebody that maybe boosts your status or somebody that makes your heart go, skip a beat or whatever. And yet you find out, well, hey, that person kind of gets off on having people hot for them or whatever. And so they're maybe not as trustworthy, and you're going like, hey, I wanted the one that was turning everybody's head, but that person loved turning people's heads, and now they drove me crazy, and they're full of themselves or whatever it might be, right? Or somebody, you over time you start to realize like there are certain types of people you're just naturally more compatible with. And those sort of character traits, you go, man, I enjoy being able to have a conversation where we tilt the prism on this idea, or we disagree, and actually this person's open to my perspective and I'm open to theirs. That's a really good example of that type of thing. And that's where I would say to this person, like, you're probably in a better spot than you feel like you are.
Yeah,
To
I agree.
you know, to really step back and evaluate. So when you say lower your standards, you know, I think it's probably time to figure out what standards really matter and which ones are okay to go ahead and lower and let go of.
Yeah. Yeah. What's a standard? What's a preference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
Well, thank you
All
for
right.
making time for
Thank
this.
you.
I always love doing these with you. You're getting a good stretch.
For whatever it's worth, I didn't have to lower any standards
Okay.
in when I fell in love
Let's
with
be
you.
honest, you had to lower several.
You had to
But
lower.
that's okay. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
We just met each other at the bottom. Is this what we're saying? This is terrible.
You exceeded expectations.
Well, honey, I love you. Thank you for 20 great years so far. This is our 21st Thanksgiving that we just had. So
It's good stuff.
it's been good stuff. All right. Love you.
Love you too.
We love everybody out there. Hey, make sure you keep those questions coming. We also love those. That is really, really great. You've been sending so many interesting things our way, and we want to make sure that we address the things that you care about. So keep sending those in, and we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.